how is a human different than a puppet if Ed, exhaustive divine determinism, is true? This is a question Tim asked Calvinists on Trinity Radio. It was answered, and we are going to discuss some things in those answers here today. Let's check it out.
According to the Oxford Dictionary Online, a puppet is defined as a person under the control of another person. All right. Merriam-Webster defined puppet this way: one whose acts are controlled by an outside force or influence. Cambridge defines puppet like this: a person whose actions are controlled by someone else. Well, we can add to these definitions. A puppet is a created thing that is fully controlled and determined by antecedent conditions, namely the decisions of the puppeteer. Now, if exhaustive divine determination, Ed, is true, then humans are created beings who are fully controlled and determined by antecedent conditions and another personal being, God. That is to say, according to Ed, God exhaustively determines the physical and mental actions of every human all the time. So here's my question. If a puppet, by definition, is a created thing that is fully determined by antecedent conditions, the decisions of another personal being, how is humanity anything different than a puppet if Ed is true?
Okay, Tim, I know we didn't have time to go through and like curate all the answers. There's a whole bunch of people that are giving answers and responses to these things. So we just want to kind of get the things that bubble to the surface. So there's somebody out there that calls you sarcastically their biggest fan, or your biggest fan, and claims that Guillaume Bignon, which by the way is one of the best names in all of the theology realm, Guillaume Bignon. I wish I had a name that cool. That he has already answered this question in his book, and that you have not read it, or you haven't considered it, or you haven't adequately addressed it.
That's the claim from this so-called biggest fan, right?
Yes, that is the claim.
He says that I have not read Bignon's book.
Or if you have, you haven't adequately addressed.
Okay, or understood it.
Yeah.
No, I've definitely read his book. In fact, I think I was probably one of the first people on the planet to tell everyone that, I mean, this was shortly after his book was published. I ordered it before it was published, had it delivered to my front door, and started reading it that same day. And that was years ago. I know that was before COVID. I mean, that's like 1 or 2 years before that all happened. So anyway, I was one of the first people on the planet to read that book and then to go public and tell everybody that they need to read that book, even though I disagreed with it, because I thought it was one of the best defenses of divine determinism that I've ever seen. But it also fails at the end of the day, I believe, but that does not mean it wasn't a brilliant attempt. And so, I mean, there's atheist books that I tell people they need to read. Obviously, I think their arguments fail, but like with John Schellenberg's argument from Divine Hiddenness and his book on it, I tell people, no, you have to read this. This is probably one of the best arguments for atheism I've ever seen. Or with Alex Rosenberg's book, I think it's The Atheist Guide to Reality. Might be getting that wrong. I tell people, you got to read that because here's an example of an atheist who's trying to be consistent across the board. Does that mean that you should be an atheist? Absolutely not. I think their arguments fail, but that doesn't mean that they're not brilliant authors, right? Or good writers. I think the same thing about Guillaume Bignon. I think his book fails at the end of the day. That doesn't mean that Guillaume Bignon is not brilliant. He's a great philosopher and a good writer, and I think he's got a great sense of humor as well. But I was telling people they got to read that book a long time ago. Now, because I've read Bignon, I also carefully chose how to set up my question to avoid Bignon's attempts to avoid the problem. So let's look at what I said again. First, I offered multiple definitions of puppet found in different dictionaries. And then I noted that I said a puppet is a created thing that is fully controlled and determined by antecedent conditions, namely the decisions of the puppeteer. And then I asked the following. I asked, if exhaustive divine determination, or ED, is true, then humans are created beings who are fully controlled and determined by antecedent conditions and another personal being, God in this case. So that is to say that according to ED, God exhaustively determines the physical and mental actions of every human all the time. And as far as I can recall, again, it's been several years since I've read his book, Bignon explains that being causally determined by God does not imply a mechanical or puppet-like existence. Unlike puppets, he says, humans have rational faculties and moral awareness. That we're aware of morality, right? Which also which allows them to make meaningful choices consistent with their determined nature, even if those choices are also determined by God. Now, that response fails to meaningfully answer my question, especially because I noted that our so-called rational faculties are always determined by a deity of deception on Bignon's view. So the free-thinking argument shows that what the determinist refers to as rational faculties always functions perfectly, exactly the way a deity of deception determines them to operate, even when we reach false theological conclusions. So on the ED view, on this Calvinistic exhaustive divine determination view, these cognitive faculties never truly malfunction, right? They always function exactly the way God makes them function, right? Exactly the way a deity of deception determines them to function. They never fail. So I've explained this to these objectors before, that the mechanics of the determination make no difference to the argument. If God determines their false theological beliefs, no matter how the determination happens, then it's metaphysically impossible for them to have inferred a better or true theological belief. So a being who cannot infer truth in a deliberative situation is not a rational being. But if God determines you to affirm a false belief in that situation, then it's impossible that you could have inferred the truth. That is not a rational being. So these guys are helping themselves to terms that are only available to the libertarian freedom fighter, right? J.P. Moreland and I made that clear in the literature. Anyway, after setting up my question, I asked the following. I said, if a puppet by definition is a created thing that is fully determined by antecedent conditions, right? The decisions of another personal being, how is humanity anything different than a puppet if ED is true? Now, if one appeals to Bignon's book, they are not going to escape the problem. After all, as I've explained, even if we have intentional states of consciousness, right? So here, this alligator puppet, here he is. I like this guy. He's definitely a puppet. Now, he doesn't have intentional states of consciousness, right? So my alligator puppet is different than I am. But what we think of and about as conscious beings, what you and I think of and about, and more importantly, the manner in which we think of and about these things, if those are all also determined by God, then how are we not puppets, right? On exhaustive divine determination, it's not just my physical actions that are determined by God. It's everything in my conscious life. My mental activity is also determined by God. So if ED were true, all of one's physical and mental actions are determined by another personal being, God, a deity of deception in this case. So what's the relevant difference? Given the definitions I've provided, how is humanity not a puppet?
Hey, if you've liked the content so far, boy, have we got a deal for you. We are only funded by viewers like you, not like PBS, who gets all the money from the state and stuff like that. Only funded by people who believe in the mission of Free Thinking Ministries. So please join us. You can join us at freethinkingministries.com/donate. That's freethinkingministries.com/donate. We exist so that we can help people apply logic and sound theology to all aspects of life. And we're doing that here on this very podcast. So please do that. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Never miss an episode. Now, back to our conversation.
Now, I'm going to bring up Doctor Strange and Bucky and Hydra and the Avengers again, right? Because moviegoers realized that Bucky was the puppet of Hydra in the Avengers movies and Captain America Civil War, or it started with the Winter Soldier, right? Now, Bucky still had intentional states of consciousness, but that doesn't mean he's not a puppet, right? He had intentionality. He could think of and about things, but the manner in which he thought of and about things was determined by Hydra. His mental actions, which led to his physical actions, were determined by the bad guys. They were determined by Hydra. And so this Calvinist's mental actions, including his objections, are determined by a deity of deception, at least if Ed were true. And I just say, thank God that Ed is false, because if Ed were true, we couldn't even possess theological knowledge. But after all, we're all about gaining theological knowledge here on this channel. And
yes, we are.
So I just thank God Ed is false. Exhaustive divine determinism is false. We aren't puppets. We are active agents. We are not passive passengers. We are active agents. We're drivers. We pilot the ship of reason, but we're not tied up, gagged, and sitting in the back seat. You're not a back seat driver. You're not in the trunk, right? You're behind the controls of reason. You are the active reasoner. C.S. Lewis said, reasoning doesn't happen to us. We do it. There's the difference between being passively determined and an active agent. We do the reasoning. And that is why, well, I'll just say we can do that because we are created in the image and likeness of God. And that's what separates us from the animals. So there you go.
Yeah, it's good. And there's also tons of examples, even in our own world, where we call people puppets of other people because they're being used by the other people to do what the person wants. Yeah. So clearly it's not only inanimate objects that are puppets. Like we understand that. Yeah. It's and I won't rehash the things that you just said. And if you who are watching this don't want to be a puppet, you can join freethinkingministries.com. You can join our group. Make sure you subscribe. We will help you learn to reason by applying logic and sound theology to all aspects of life. We're supposed to do that. Isaiah 1:18. Let's reason together. That's what we do here at Free Thinking Ministries. So subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, like this video, and share it with a friend who thinks that you're a puppet. Go share it right now and show them that you're not. All right. Okay. So same person, same thing. They bring up, I think it's Kevin Tempe. Is that how you say his name? Okay. Kevin Tempe. So Kevin Tempe, who rejects divine determinism, said that no academic actually presses these puppet arguments anymore. So the implication is that since you're pressing the puppet objection, then you're at least doing something that no other academic does. And so that makes you kind of silly or outside the realm of academia or whatever. So how would you respond? Like, this is the argument of, hey, this guy says that no one seriously says this anymore. So if anybody's seriously saying it, then they're just ignorant or they're arrogant or both.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd say J.P. Moreland, he's a pretty well-known academic, and I don't think people are going to say he's ignorant or arrogant. But he's noted how humans were akin to mere puppets in a theater. In our academic journal article that we co-authored together, he wrote that part. He was the one that said that humanity was akin to puppets in a theater on this deterministic view. So the claim that no academic or scholar presses objections like these is simply false. J.P. Moreland is recognized as one of the top philosophers in the world, even by non-Christian philosophers. Unless one say, well, Moreland doesn't contribute to the academic literature on the specific topics of freedom and determinism. I've heard that with people trying to get out of the arguments that JP and I have made. Well, again, I'd say that's simply false. In fact, Moreland has even written an entire essay pointing out some of his disagreements with Kevin Tempe and why Tempe was wrong. Now, I think Tempe is right on a lot of things. Moreland and I agree with Tempe on so many things. But he's not infallible. And so I disagree with him on others. Tempe is brilliant, but not infallible. In fact, he and I have had much interaction debating these things in private email exchanges in the past. And I know why I disagree with Kevin on some of these things. And I can also explain why I disagree. In fact, see the article I wrote with JP Moreland for starters. But again, I know why this puppet objection is worth noting. Just because one has mental states, it does not allow the determinist to escape if all of one's mental actions and intentions are also determined by the puppeteer. You're still a puppet unless, as soon as you say that everything about a human is determined by a deity, then you're a puppet if you're conscious or not.
And the other thing is, even if somebody says, hey, no one really is advancing this argument anymore. Okay, well then debunk the argument as it stands then.
That's right.
Like just address it, right? Okay. Go for it. Should be easy, right? So so then let's say someone can say something like Bignon says that consciousness, look, I did it just this time.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, consciousness is the relevant difference. So suggesting that intentional states of consciousness solves the problem of this puppet objection.
Yeah, again, that simply fails as a response. As I've been careful to explain, human consciousness is also determined by this deity of deception. All of what one thinks of and about, and the exact manner in which one thinks about these things, all are determined by this supernatural puppeteer who turns out to be a deity of deception on this view. So to reiterate what I've said before, Bucky and the Avengers possessed intentional states of consciousness. He was still the puppet of Hydra. I said this on another channel. Joe Biden seemed to be a puppet. Joe Biden still, as far as I know, he still had intentional states of consciousness, right? Clearly, those were not to be trusted, but he could still think of and about things. So consciousness doesn't get the folks who believe that God determines all things off of any epistemological hooks. They're still hanging there. So these Ed Calvinists are going to need more than mere consciousness to get off this hook or to get out of this trap, right? These guys need to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, so what I'm gathering here is the puppet objection, even if nobody uses it, seems to be, at least the way you have posited it, seems to remain unscathed. And I know that you have talked to and debated Guillaume Bignon on X and stuff like that, and haven't been able to actually do a debate in person on this particular objection. I know that would still stand as far as an offer if he'd be willing to do it. So
definitely. Yep. I've told him on X for everybody to see. I said I would debate you if you want to have that debate. I don't think he's interested in having it right now, but I respect him so much that he's I think he's just a great thinker. I think he's wrong, right? But I think we could have a respectful conversation where we get closer to truth together.
All right. And that's what we want to do here at FreeThinking Ministries, get closer to truth together. We want to help people reason together by applying logic and sound theology to all areas of life. And you can do that by reading all of our articles at freethinkingministries.com, subscribing to our YouTube. Also, you can listen to these things while you're working out, that sort of thing, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that podcasts are available to you. Make sure you check those out. Thank you for listening today. Don't be a puppet. Subscribe to FreeThinking Ministries so that you can remain free from the shackles of determinism. Thanks for watching. God bless. And as we always say at FreeThinking Ministries. Oh, one more. Go ahead.
What's that? As we always say?
As we always say at FreeThinking Ministries.
Stay reasonable.